All right. Hello, everybody. Just want to first thank CWSD for inviting me today to come talk about my favorite thing that I obsess about almost every day, and that's soil and soil health. And so I'm with the Bureau of Water Quality Planning, and my duties there to oversee 319H subgrants and work with our partners who are, getting these grants to fund their work, and also to provide general education in a variety of ways around watershed health, non-point source pollution, erosion control. And I'm using soil health as a platform to address some of these education and conservation needs in agricultural lands. And then quickly, a little bit about myself. I do have a strong background in agriculture. All of this started for me with water quality and studying soils at university and working on farms and being a farm manager and being a vineyard manager. And I'll save my entire background, but that's how I've gained a real strong knowledge and interest in soil health, or we could also call it soil and water conservation. So today we're going to talk about the water quality impacts from agricultural lands, more from a general, national, or global perspective. I'm not targeting anything particular in the Carson watershed, although we certainly probably have some of these issues and concerns to address. I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with the idea or concept of soil health in the room. So in fact, I forgot to mention, I've never really presented this type of speech to this audience before. Generally, it's with landowners, producers, farmers, ranchers, maybe other conservationists. I know we have plenty of people like that in the room today. So yeah, I'll do a general overview. We'll talk some basics about soil. We'll get nerdy about soil science a bit. We'll talk about how can soil health improve water quality issues. Right, one of my favorite topics, really. The principles of soil health. And we're going to look at some specific soil properties that we can use as like an indicator or a metric to improve soil health or to improve water quality through soil health management. And then we'll have some fun doing some tests over here, some slake tests and water infiltration tests. So let's jump into it. Agriculture has a huge impact on water quality. And generally, it's from runoff or soil erosion. Soil erosion is probably our largest issue globally. In fact, I didn't put the statistics up here, but they're pretty staggering. And the National Water Quality Assessment has determined that agricultural runoff or soil erosion is the leading cause of water quality impacts to rivers and streams, and the third leading source for lakes, and the second largest source of impairments to wetlands. And we certainly have it's not just agricultural land in the traditional sense, but even non-paved road systems that are associated with agricultural lands, and forestry would probably be grouped into this category as well. And Birgit Whittegren, who's with our branch, will be speaking about the National Water Quality Assessment, I believe, right, or the initiative tomorrow. So what is this pollutant? What is this largest source from runoff or soil erosion that's causing an impact? Well, it's non-point source pollution. So it's not something we could specifically target, even if from that bottom right picture there, if we have runoff coming off a site, we might be able to point at that and say, aha, chocolate milk coming off the site. That's not necessarily point source, because within that runoff is a combination of contaminants such as soil, which is our largest impact to water quality actually. And with that soil could be bonded with chemicals and particulates, pesticide residues, et cetera, and certainly nutrients, right? Soil is going to carry nutrients with it. So non-point source pollution on ag land happens from usually storm events, rain runoff, could be wind erosion as well, snow melt, irrigation, water runoff as well. The Carson River Watershed Adaptive Stewardship Plan identifies non-point source pollution as the leading sources of water pollution to the Carson River watershed. So just looking at the main issues around non-point source pollution we might expect from ag land is soil erosion is pretty much number one, because if soil is eroding off the land, it's carrying with it all of those non-point source contaminants that we might suspect. And sediment in general, sediment delivery to water bodies is a huge issue to to the health of our streams and aquatic ecosystems. Nutrient loss that can happen through leaching, but more so if soil's moving off site. That would be kind of the theme of my talk all the time, is if soil's moving off site, it is carrying with it nutrients. And so that is usually those, if there's nitrates or phosphates from synthetic fertilizers, those are going to be bonded or become suspended in solution with the runoff and soil that's being moved off site. Pesticides, of course, that's, and you know, a lot of stuff today is complicated. Each slide I present could probably be its own workshop in itself. So I just want to put a disclaimer out there that I'm kind of being a little general today as well, so we can get through this. And bacteria or pathogens can be a source from livestock or other issues, but we're also going to look at how livestock can be a strong solution for soil health as well. So what might we expect? What is runoff? Well, here's a nice picture. This is actually from New Mexico. Even a small rain event can produce a tremendous amount of water flowing off site, especially if the soil health is poor or if there isn't much ground cover on site. So there we have just, you know, water moving off site usually begins to concentrate flow and it'll make its way to a water body. This is actually a picture of returned irrigation flow. And if you just look slightly in the background, you see some rill erosion, you see some encrusting of the soil. And, you know, this water's flowing back into the ditch, and with it, it's, you know, a little muddy, a little chocolate milk there. So obviously it's probably carrying some sources of non-point source, and it could just be sediment. And then we're all familiar with the Mississippi dead zone. I just put this up here because it is really the, you know, the quintessential issue that we face in many water bodies, but the Mississippi watershed is humongous, and it's draining a humongous amount of land, and probably the you know, per square acre there's so much agriculture in this watershed, it's pretty phenomenal. And the Mississippi dead zone is really a result of all the runoff that comes off the land, and not just agriculture, but a lot of it sources back to agriculture, and you know, these nutrient loading, the sediment loading, it's caused a significant phytoplankton blooms, and those phytoplankton, you know, eventually die and they go sink to the bottom. And as they decompose, they require oxygen, and that oxygen is being used up and being starved in this aquatic system. That's kind of what the dead zone is, and we see that in all types of smaller examples across the West. And we got to talk about the Dust Bowl just real quick, because wind erosion is real. And when the soil can be disturbed in so many different ways, but even through wind events, and we obviously have significant wind here in Nevada. And you know, when that soil becomes displaced from wind, it may not just get deposited right into a water body, but it's now loose and more susceptible to being transported by water as well. And obviously, we still have Dust Bowl-like situations happening to this day in the United States. And then if you haven't read this book, Dirt by David Montgomery, he just makes such a compelling argument, or shows compelling evidence that civilizations have collapsed, have literally vanished because of soil erosion. And, you know, we still see this to today. Globally, we're losing huge areas of agricultural production from soil erosion. So it's a fun book to read. I just suggest well, it depends how fun. I have enjoyment out of doom and gloom, I realize. So, but let's jump into, let me see, do we have a time on here? Okay, sorry, I gotta check myself here. Quickly, I want to go through this idea of the downward spiral, I like to call it, soil degradation. Okay, so we need to talk about soil health today, but we need to understand what are the root causes of soil to become unhealthy or more vulnerable to erosion, or why is soil contributing to water quality issues? And it really just starts with soil disturbance. It's really that simple. And the plow, the invention of the plow has caused significant degradation of the soil. And not saying that you can't have some sort of tillage in an agricultural system, that really is our main culprit to destroying the essence of soil function. And so as we begin introducing significant continual annual disturbance to the soil, the organic matter begins to deplete. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of organic matter. Half of that is roughly organic carbons. That carbon is generally volatilized as carbon dioxide. So the disturbance of our soil also is contributing to huge carbon emissions. And the biological life, which we'll talk about today, is so important, loses its habitat. It loses its function in the soil, which is critical to every single process in the soil, including the ability of water to infiltrate or be stored in the soil, is really even wrapped up in the cycle of the microbial life. So when we begin to degrade those those two things, organic matter and the biological life, our aggregate stability, our soil structure becomes depleted, it becomes poor, and as that we have this spiraling of less infiltration, more runoff, and you can just follow the whole downward spiral there, and eventually we have a agricultural land that is requiring more inputs of fertilizer, pesticide, and probably a lot more energy and labor to do everything that's required. So now we kind of have a quick understanding of the degradation of soil. Let's talk about soil health. What is soil health? The NRCS defines it as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. That sounds pretty simple, right? I think everyone here understands the importance of soil and how critical it is for watershed health, ecosystem health. But let's just kind of look at these main functions, like what is soil really doing to support ecosystem health? And when I say ecosystem, not just wetlands or prairie land, but the ecosystem, even farmland as well. So healthier soils, water storage and filtration, water filtration. Soil is the greatest water filter on the planet, okay? If it's not able to infiltrate water well, if water's running off site, then it's not doing a great job of filtering that water. It's the greatest terrestrial carbon sink on the planet. That's going to include your root systems, your plants. Okay, plants, everything. When we talk about soil, we need to. It's not just this dirt on our fingertips. It's everything living inside it as well. So that biomass is storing carbon. Biological function, diversity, and productive capacity. So that could be the productive capacity of a forest. It could be the productive capacity of agricultural crops. So we're going to think about today, it's a tool to improve water quality at the watershed scale. And so we can think about soil health being a function to improve at the watershed scale, not just in ag, but also maybe in residential, landscaping. But I'm going to focus on agriculture today, but we certainly can take these principles into other sectors as well. So what are characteristics of a healthy soil? It's going to have good porosity, good pore space, optimal pore space for water and air exchange, which means it has to have good soil structure. So root penetration is good, good drainage, soil's not compacted, high levels of decomposed organic matter. This is really important. So everyone today walk away and understand the importance of organic matter in the soil, if you weren't already. And when I say decomposed or organic matter, we're actually talking about highly stable organic matter. It's not the compost or the residues or the materials or stuff that's on top of the soil that people think is organic matter. 90+% of organic matter is manufactured underneath the soil surface through biological activity. Okay, so this is basically like amorphous material that's microscopic. That is what we call stable organic matter. So it needs to have high levels of that. It needs to have active or diverse microbial population, optimal nutrient cycling. We'll talk more about that. Good water storage. It's resistant to degradation. That would be a characteristic of a healthy soil. And then it's sequestering carbon efficiently. So how does a healthy soil improve water quality? I'm just going to rip through these pretty quick. Kind of already mentioned them. Healthier soil is going to have, we're going to increase water infiltration. So less of that water is running off of the site. We're going to increase the water retention. So the water holding capacity improves. We know that for every 1% increase in organic matter in the top 6 inches of the soil, we're storing almost an additional 30,000 gallons of water per acre, okay? That's been proven in research. And I've seen it with my own eyes and senses, farming, increasing organic matter on the farm. So it's going to be more resilient to erosion. So sediment delivery is going to be reduced. Efficient nutrient cycling. We're going to talk about the microbes a little bit and how they play a critical role in the cycling of nutrients. And one fact to be understood is 98+% of all nitrogen in the soil needs to go through the microbial cycle. And the majority of nitrogen is not available to plants. It's in an organic form, so it needs to become mineralized or digested and move through the microbial cycle to be available as an inorganic form, like nitrate. So that's really important because the microbes will grab onto nitrogen. They love nitrogen. So the more microbes we have in the soil, the better nutrient cycling we're going to have, and less of that able to run off or be leached off site. So healthy soil has a really great ability to retain chemicals, heavy metals. It's just retaining on like a sponge. And here's a really cool ideas to be thinking about that have been studied is water that's moving off of site, because water will move off site naturally. Although soil can only hold a certain amount of water, that water that does move off site is going to be clean. It's going to be cool. And that's what our water bodies need. And so if we have better infiltration, we probably are going to have better groundwater recharge. And then the idea that the seasonal flow, the duration of seasonal flows can be extended, because if we have a really compacted soil, water's moving off of that land quickly, right? It doesn't infiltrate into our soil. That water that's flowing off of the land faster is increasing peak flows into our streams, our rivers, our watersheds. So, we've seen plenty of evidence that peak flows are increasing, flow velocities are increasing in that short duration during storm events. So perhaps at a watershed scale, if we're increasing our soil water infiltration or retention capabilities, we might see, longer seasonal flows. Okay, the 4 principles of soil health, if you have not heard of them, they're pretty simple. Minimize soil disturbance, maximize soil cover. So cover crops, any kind of residues, material on the armor, the top of the soil, increasing biodiversity through not monocropping, mixing up your crop rotations, or having a pasture that's full of diverse species, and maximizing continuing living roots. So the soil needs living roots. If you can have it 100% of the time, that's what we want to go for. So that's really the most important. Those are the 4 soil health principles that the NRCS came up with, and they're simple, but they can be complex in how they're integrated on the land. And then the 5th one that everyone's talking about now is integration of livestock. So ruminants are obviously natural to our landscapes, and they do play a critical role if you can integrate livestock in an adaptive management or intensive grazing system, not a continuous grazing where they're put out on 1,000 acres of land to go roam, but we're talking about an intensified grazing, intentional grazing system. Livestock can really be a huge tool to soil health. Okay, so some soil properties I want to focus on today. This is soil health there in the Venn diagram, but that could just say soil. So when we study soil, you can be a soil physician, a soil chemist, a soil biologist, right? So these 3 components of science make up soil. But we are going to focus on the physical and biological as a indicator or metric to improve our soil for water quality or water holding, water infiltration. So quickly, I want to get into a little bit of soil science. You guys may have seen some of these diagrams on the left here, where soil is composed of roughly about 50% pore space. We can say a healthy functioning soil. Some of that's air, some of that's water. The other 50% is going to be organic matter, maybe 5% of the healthy soil should have around 5%. Doesn't matter what climate you're in. We can get up to that percent in Nevada. Some climates can be much higher. And then the other 45% is the mineral fraction, the sand, silts, and clay, the 3 particle sizes of soil mineralogy. But now we're thinking about soil in this whole other world because we've really, in the last 10 years, begun to understand the biological function of soil. When I was in school studying soil science at Cal Poly, we did not talk about soil biology the way that we know more now in the last 10 years than we knew the previous 100 years. And we're only tipping the iceberg on it. We know more about our deep sea creatures than we know about the soil biota. So now, if you look at that bottom diagram in the pore space, where it says water and air, we're also putting in biology. This is a new diagram that we got to teach students. They didn't teach me that. And then soil structure. To have a healthy soil, we need healthy soil structure. So we're going to talk about the macro and micro aggregation, the formation of aggregates, and how that's so important for understanding how a soil becomes a healthy soil, I suppose. And I'm going to have to get through this a little quick because I know I started a little late. We have about 20 minutes, and I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for this. So soil life, the soil food web, is the most important and critical component for managing soil. Okay, soil is no longer looked at as this dirt on our fingers, but it's full of life. And so we manage soil for its life and promoting habitat. As you might want to promote and build habitat in a riparian zone, we want to build habitat in the soil. So these are just looking at some ecosystem function of microbes, and we can break them down into the engineers that are bioturbating and creating these bigger pore spaces and decomposing and breaking things down. And we have the biological regulators, and we have the biochemical engineers. Okay, they're playing a huge role in the phosphorus and nitrogen cycle. So how do microbes exist? What do they need to live in the soil? Can we just have soil with nothing in it? We're going to have microbes? Sure, but we're not going to have a diverse, healthy population of microbes. Microbes need plants. They live in symbiosis together. So that's why we need that living continual root system. So let's quick photosynthesis education here. Plants, right? They capture the energy of the sun. They take in CO2, they convert that CO2 into other forms of carbon, which we can think of as sugars, amino acids, food for microbes. They're exuding these sugars out their root systems. The root system is a biological hotspot in the soil. It's like the riparian corridor, essentially. Uh-oh, is timer happening all of a sudden? Okay, better watch out. Okay, so we want to think of this rhizosphere being this biological hotspot, and in that zone is where organic carbon or soil organic matter is being manufactured through microbial processes. That's a whole nother. People are studying this at the PhD level. We'll just leave it there for today. That how important our living root system is for microbes, and then these microbes, as they begin breaking and mineralizing things, they're providing nutrients to the plant, right? So we have this cycle you see there. So I want to jump into the formation of aggregates quickly. Aggregation is the key to soil health, and that crumb-like structure you might have heard of, that is what is really the pinnacle of good soil aggregation. So soil aggregates, they play a critical role in water infiltration, nutrient cycling, gas exchange, everything, because everything's connected to the formation of these aggregates. And basically what we're talking about is those soil particles, sand, silt, and clay, they become bonded. They need to be bonded so they're not easily displaced or able to be moved off site. And for that to happen, they become glued together essentially through biological processes, biological glues, polysaccharides, chlomulin, these different compounds, organic matter, and this really complex system of fungal hyphae and fine root hairs, and we can go down the whole chain, but they begin to bond together and they become resistant. And these glues are actually a little bit water repellent as well. So we have macro aggregates, which we'll see here. And as you're looking at that, these smaller round circles would be a micro aggregate. And inside there, we see particulate organic matter, which is that really highly stable organic matter. We have mycorrhizae fungi, and this whole soil biological food web working together, bonding each other together, and being held by shear strength through root systems at the larger scale. And then just bringing it a little bit closer in here on the left, a macro aggregate is smaller than a P. So that's what we're talking about, a macro aggregate smaller than a P. A micro aggregate is really down to the microscopic level. And inside these micro aggregates, which we need like a microscope to really look at, in between the matrices of these is pore space. And they're like condominiums and villages for our microbes. They become shelter for microbes. So aggregation is protecting microbes, and microbes are creating aggregates as well. It's kind of crazy, you know. I honestly, the more I sometimes learn about this, the less I know, I feel like. But we're going to jump into looking at aggregate stability in person and what happens to a soil when it has poor soil aggregation or poor soil health, low organic matter. And you can see there, that's a slake test. So one was more resilient to water, one wasn't. We're going to see that in person. Oh, and quickly, this is important. Healthy soil structure. If you have healthy aggregation, you have healthy soil structure. See on the left, water's flowing through the profile. There's residues on the top of the soil. It's Its root system has higher organic matter. It's darker, you know, simple things we can look at. Soil on the right is degraded. The topsoil, those soil particles are displaced through water or wind, and they begin to seal and encrust the soil surface. Water can't infiltrate through it. And so you see that flow path. Water is moving off the top of the soil. And this would just be an image of what we might expect on the left, this no-till corn to soybean rotation. We do have some farmer in Fallon that are working on some no-till systems like this with their silage corn. It's pretty phenomenal. And on the right, you see that encrusted look on the soil where that's actually from just overhead irrigation that's caused that. Good soil structure, good water infiltration, improved water quality. We figured it all out, right? Ready to go? Oh, I forgot I have these slides. I got to move on here. This is just this cycle, organic inputs, improved microbial function, aggregations improved, infiltrations increased. We maintain soil function, and the cycle continues as you have this healthy closed loop system. So we're going to look at a couple soils today. They're from Nevada. They're not too far from here. Two fields farmed different in the last 20 years, 800 feet apart. Same soil type, same soil texture. I have the soil textures even sent to lab to prove that the sand, silt, and clays are exactly the same. One has been under pasture, then converted to minimal till, no-till regenerative vegetable production. The other on the right's been under vigorous tillage, a whole bunch of different cropping systems. It's got last time I measured it was under 2% organic matter. It was around 1.5, and the one on the left was about 4.5. Last we measured it. So we're going to jump over here. I don't know if, do you want me to take this?
Yeah, let's go.
Whenever I pick up a mic, I feel like I got to sing or something.
Today we're here in Carson City at Fuji Park, and we're going to do some of my favorite soil health presentations. We're going to be doing a slake test and a water infiltration test, or some people call it a rainfall infiltration test. These two soil tests are a great demonstration to look at healthy soil properties versus unhealthy soil properties, and to understand the function of soil under the forces of water. And so what we're going to see in the slake test, we'll start with this one, is when soil is put into the water, the soil is going to, the pore space is going to get filled with the water. And a more healthier soil has strong soil structure, it has strong aggregate stability, and the individual soil particles are more tightly glued together through biological glues or biological cementing agents. And we're going to look at two soils that are the same soil type. I'm going to pick them up here. They're both sandy loam soils, Nevada soils, not too far from here at the Reno Experiment Station, which is managed at the University of Nevada, Reno. And these soils were provided to us from the Desert Farming Initiative. And these two soils are about 800 feet apart in two different fields. They both have been farmed for decades. And what I have here is the soil on the right, is a soil that was under permanent pasture for quite a long time. We know many decades. And then it was recently converted to intensive cropping system under regenerative farming practices. So that means very minimal tillage, a lot of residues left in place, minimal disturbance, cover crops, and high crop diversity. This soil on my left is a soil that was under a lot of different cropping systems for research, predominantly conventional farming, so a lot of tillage, a lot of chemical application for controlling weeds and pests. This soil still, there's some chemical application, but it's all organic and generally, you know, organic biological fertilizers. This soil was a vineyard for about the last 20 years. And a lot of mechanical disturbance, just a lot of disturbance in the soil, no soil health principles implemented, so no cover crops, no residue management, and again, quite a bit of tillage took place in the soil. I'd also like to point out that you can see the difference in the color. This soil is darker and this one is lighter. Again, same exact soil texture. They're from the same geological landscape or geomorphic landscape. This soil has over 4% organic matter, and this soil has less than 2% organic matter. So what we know about these two soils is, well, one, this one is by definition healthier. It has more pore space. It has much more biological diversity, more biological activity. So it has much more biological glues or cementing agents, which binds these soil particles together and creates what we call strong soil aggregation, or good soil structure. This soil has much less biodiversity, a much unhealthier soil microbiological population or less. Again, it has less organic matter, so it has less of the biological properties we want to see. If you want to conduct this soil demonstration, you can do it anywhere. You can do it in your garden, you can do it on the farmland. Again, these are agricultural soils. What's important to showcase and illustrate the properties of soils under the forces of water is that they must be completely air dried, or you can oven dry them at a low temperature, about 100 degrees. But essentially, soil is composed of around 50% of soil is pore space. And so what we've done is we want the pore space in here to be pretty void of water, or water that's available for plant uptake. So we have very, very dry soils here, so you can assume that the pore space is not occupied with water. So when we put these soils in the water's immediately going to begin filling that pore space. This soil is going to be much more easily eroded than this soil is. So the slake test will illustrate this for us. So I've kind of given away already what you might see, but we'll let the soil speak for itself. Okay, so I'm going to invite my volunteer friend Martina up here to help conduct this slake test. So we're both going to pick up our soils here and we're going to put them in at the same time. And also wanted to point out, you know, we have these PEDs, we call these soil PEDs. They're about the same size. So when you're doing this demonstration, we want to have the soil PEDs be roughly about the same size. Okay, you ready to put it in?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. You can just push it in all the way. Okay, so we let the soil speak for itself. I already explained a lot of what you might expect coming into this, this demonstration. Now let's think about this in the field environment or in the natural environment. You can see this soil here on my left, the one that is less healthier soil. The soil particles are detaching from each other. They don't have the biological glues that are bonding them together and all of the other biological complexity, hyphae and fungal hyphae and other fine root systems that are going to keep it intact. Doesn't have good porosity, so the pore space is literally collapsing as the soil particles detach. And so these soil particles, now that they're detached and they're in solution, if this was say a storm event on agricultural lands or a big irrigation event, or non-agricultural lands where there's very disturbed soil, these are the soil particles that are leaving the site through runoff or even wind erosion, because although we're looking at water, some of these principles still apply to wind erosion. And these are sedimentation is our largest water quality issues in the United States and probably across the planet. These soil particles are also carrying with them other nutrients, residues. Soil is really good at bonding to particulates and chemicals, especially clay soils. Here on the right, boy, we barely have had anything fall off, or we call this the slake test, because what we're looking at here is these particles are slaking off of each other. They're slaking apart. And we look at the soil on the right here. The pore space is being filled with the water. The soil particles are not collapsing. As I mentioned, the soil has much more organic matter and the biological glues and the cementing agents to keep the soil intact. There is a little bit of soil breaking and slaking off on this one. That's natural. Soil erosion is natural. This is not necessarily natural, though. This is, we could say it's a human-induced phenomenon to have soil erode at such a high rate. So from a water quality perspective, I think it's clear and evident. We let the demonstration speak for itself. We have turbid water here that's in a rain event or a storm event or irrigation event, transporting soil particles to water bodies. And on the right here, we have very clear water that is obviously much better water quality. Okay, now we're going to conduct another soil health demonstration test known as a soil infiltration test. Soil infiltration tests can be done many different ways. Obviously, you can do it in the field, but for the sake of demonstration in classrooms or on in-field trip environments, we have this nifty setup here. Basically, just have 2 cylinders with a top that we're going to pour water through that's perforated. And at the bottom of these tubes is perforated as well. It looks like this. So we're going to pour the same volume of water over the top. We're going to watch it rain through, and we're going to see how quickly the water infiltrates through these 2 soils. We also have we're using the same water volume, and we have a green and a red water so that you can easily see how quickly the water is infiltrating through these cylinders. And again, we have the same soil types as we used in the slake test. We have on the right the healthier soil. It's got more organic matter, more regenerative practices and soil health practices being implemented, more biology. And then on the left, we have the soil that doesn't have as good of soil health properties. And as we saw in the slake test, the soil on the right slaked apart very quickly. It wasn't as resilient under the forces of water. So when we pour the water over, we will see which one can infiltrate water more efficiently than the other. Okay, Martina's gonna come and help me out again. I'll let you come to right here this time. She gets the red water, the bad water. Okay, so we're gonna pour this over the top, and we can just do it just nice and casually. It's the same volume of water, so it doesn't matter how fast we do it. We'll just make sure nothing can fall or spill. We'll also be able to see how much water is percolating through this soil profile. I forgot to mention the soil was broken up a bit. It has to be to put it in here. Well, I think it's worth talking about now. We could wait another hour for this to drain through, percolate through, infiltrate through the soil profile, but as we can see, the healthier soil on the right, much more efficient at infiltrating water through the soil pore space. On the left, as we saw like in the slake test, when those soil particles detach, the pore space collapses. And so what we have here is on the top, the particles are actually collapsing and subsiding and creating a sort of a the way concrete forms, you could imagine. So the surface is being sealed off. But on the right here, obviously all the water drained through very quickly. Because the soil has more organic matter and more pore space, it's actually retaining more of the water as well, which is kind of hard to imagine in this demonstration because it looks like it all just poured right through. Now, one of the most important implications for a farmer and the watershed is this water in a healthier soil, it's infiltrating and it's having deep percolation into the subsoil and into the groundwater. So we can assume that we can have better groundwater recharge and also more subsoil moisture for the growing season. Okay, this water we're keeping on site. You have a little bit of slope on your property. That water, this water here that's on the top, it's already moved off site. It's running off. And as we saw in the slake test, it's running off with soil particles. That's going to the stream. Okay, we're looking at the infiltration test here again to see the end results and the impact to the soil surface. So looking down here, we had the rain droplet impacts that hit the soil surface, and the soil particles are detached from themselves and sort of coalesce and subside, and creating a seal to the topsoil. That's what you're looking at there. You don't see any soil structure or much aggregation, and that's a typical view of a sealed soil surface. And now we're looking at the healthier soil in the soil filtration test, and we're going to take a look at the topsoil of this one. What you're going to see is different properties here where we can see the aggregates, we can see the structure and complexity of the soil. It didn't subside, there wasn't all the soil particle detachment, and we don't have any sealing of the soil surface, so you still can see that complexity and structure of the soil.
There's a lot of different soil health, or I like to call soil water conservation practices. These aren't new. We've been doing this since the Dust Bowl, since the inception of the Soil Conservation Service, now the NRCS, and they've been promoting these practices for a long time. Oh, that no-till high residue. So that is a farm in Fallon right there. And I won't say who it is, but I think this person's ready to start showcasing what they're doing. So strip till, minimal till, sometimes you can't get away from tillage. There's a lot of different crops there, fine seeds like an arugula or spring mix or a carrot. How do we do that under no-till systems, you know? But you know, you can reduce your tillage. So it's not all or nothing. Cover crops, winter cover crops are so important for soil health. So maintaining a cover through the winter, we get, you know, rain events or high winds, but not allowing the soil to be bare is really the key. So harder nut to crack in Nevada, cover cropping. Do we do summer cover crops? No, we don't have much water. Why would we give that water to a summer cover crop? Winter cover crops are very possible though. I've been working with them since I used to run the Desert Farming Initiative, and I still work and consult with them on winter cover cropping, and I serve on the Southwestern Cover Crop Council. And if you want to talk more about winter cover crops, I'd love to. Crop diversity. So we just more diversity in the field is going to be better. So we're gonna introduce more microbial diversity. Different root systems exude different compounds or have different acidity. Even mustards. There's so many mustards in the family of the mustard family. But you know, you look at a little arugula versus something that can tap root deep like a daikon. They're physiologically different, and so they do actually enhance soil health, even if it's the same species. But we'd like to see multiple species of different plants rotated through that field, like nature does. Adaptive grazing. I'm not a grazing expert, but we have such tremendous potential in the Carson watershed for improving grazing practices, and there's some folks doing it. And then buffer strips, there's more other things we can talk about, but you know, on the ditches or near waterways, if we have that buffer zone between the tillage ground and that waterway to provide a filtration mechanism to capture runoff and, you know, maybe capture some of those nutrients or just sediment in general. There's been quite a few studies done. This one real quickly, Kansas State University did, where they implemented cover crops in one field on the right and the other on the left. They did not during the winter. And you can just see the visual picture there, but they measured roughly a decrease, 60 to 70% decrease in erosion. I guess in 2017 and 18, they didn't have much rain. It ended up being like a very dry time of the year for the Midwest. But in 2016, they had significant rain events. And you can see, if you look at 2016, the bar on the green bar is the cover crop. So that's kilograms per hectare of erosion. I don't know what that equals in tonnage. We could figure that out. But the graph, illustrates the reduction in soil erosion from the field just through winter cover crops. I took these pictures this morning of my garden, and just to kind of think about it from a garden residential perspective, but we can integrate mulches, in a landscape that's not a garden, right? That would attenuate water flow, hitting the ground and not compacting the soil. But if we think about like just a vegetable garden, is this possible? If we can do it, if you look here, these are winter cover crops that I'm trialing, different species, and they've been surviving the whole winter. And just wanted to show this here, and you can see some of the species on the right, and it's just a no-till garden, and just integrating practices that can be done on a larger scale. And there's some garlic there on the left that actually has all my grass clippings become my mulch into my soil. So maybe we have a chance to just get this going on the residential scale as well. And I got a couple of minutes here. This is really important. The Soil Health Institute has just been pioneering what can be done with soil health, and they're doing a lot with economic evaluation and working with farmers. And if you look at when they surveyed 100 farmers who are implementing soil health practices, either something simple like cover crops, or they went the whole 9 yards and integrated a no-till system, you can see the benefits that they reported. Yields increasing, but the big thing right there is improved water quality. 100% of these farmers said, anecdotally, measuring this would cost a lot of money, but anecdotally, water flowing off their site or their ditches, or a lot of farmers in the Midwest and other areas have wetlands on their properties, just because there's so much water. So they're actually seeing an improvement in water quality on their land. I thought that was insane when I saw this. So what, 100%, not one of them ignored it? So farmers know, they're stewards. They know what's going on. And then lastly, there's some economic numbers here. Soil health has proven to be an economical boost for many farmers who have adopted it and continue to stick with it. But these other benefits at the bottom, 93% report increased access to their fields, right? Because water's infiltrating, water's not standing, the soil's not collapsing like that and becoming mud. And so they're able to actually get into their fields earlier after storm events. So I find that it's kind of connected to water quality if you think about it. And then 97% reported increased resilience to extreme weather. Just really interesting information that's coming out of the Soil Health Institute. So in the past, I've done presentations focused maybe a little bit more on crop health when I've had other positions that are focused on crop production, but today it's all about water quality. But there are other benefits to the farmer. It's not about just improving water quality at the land or watershed scale, but maybe the bottom line for the farm as well. So with that, I think that puts us at lunch. Hopefully I made everyone really hungry. And questions, and if not, I'll be around and